Welcome to Oh God, What Now, the podcast that can't afford Sky TV. I'm Dorian Lynskey. On today's show, Rishi Sunak revealed the Tory manifesto at Silverstone racetrack on Tuesday. Can he perform a pit stop, or are the wheels coming off the Tory campaign? And as Ed Davey boards yet another roller coaster, who's doing well on the campaign trail and what actually makes a good strategy? Plus, in the extra bit for supporters, how would a centre-left Starmer government deal with a mainland Europe that's veering off to the right? Let's meet today's panel. First, author of The Future of Trust and creator of Jam Tomorrow, Ros Taylor. Hi, Ros.
Hello, Dorian.
We've just had a report about your specialist subject, trust, possibly sponsored by you and your publishers. What is it, and what does it reveal?
It's the NatSen British Social Attitudes survey, which is obviously a big annual thing, massive investigation into what people think about lots of things in politics and culture and so on. And the top line is that trust is lower than ever, which, you might think is good news for someone like me, but I keep hearing this and it makes me despair somewhat. But essentially, one of the big findings is that people had a bit more hope and trust in 2019. They were a bit more optimistic about the government, and now they're not.
Is this trust across the board? Like in America, you see, trust in the media, judiciary, pretty much everything, I think, except like the army. Diving. Is that the same here? Is it specifically politics?
It doesn't look into the media. It looks into Parliament and government and MPs in particular. So basically, people are upset that they were told Brexit would improve the economy and cut immigration, and it hasn't. And the really worrying thing, though, especially for Remainers, is that this hasn't just destroyed people's trust in politicians. This isn't just a Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, what a load of... Yeah. It's also destroyed their trust in the system to deliver the things that they want and their ability to get things done.
Has it affected their trust in their judgment in voting for Brexit in the first place?
I think probably not. I think that they feel they've been let down.
Next, it's the Leeds Westminster editor, Zoe Grunewald. Hi, Zoe.
Hello.
Reform is in a pickle over its spokesperson defending a candidate's claim that the UK should not have gone to war with Nazi Germany. I would like to say I did not see that coming, but I did. After ditching an armada of weirdos in recent weeks, is Reform slate still pretty cranky?
Yeah, so this is one of the Reform UK's candidates, Ian Gribben, who, as you said Britain should have taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality, and that his comments were probably true. Because if there's anything we've learned from that, it was that, Hitler had good motivations. I mean, obviously not.
Appeasement works, I believe, is the message.
Terrible thing to say. What's even worse is that Reform spokesperson told the BBC, who reported on these comments, that his views were not endorsements, but were shared by the vast majority of the British establishment, including the BBC of its day, and is probably true. So then Richard Tice had to come out on Twitter and defend his spokesperson. And he said his spokesperson was dealing with a difficult family emergency or something to that effect. None of this gives the impression of a campaign that's going particularly well and is very slick or well-oiled. This isn't the first candidate that's been caught sharing social media content that's racist or promoting conspiracy theories or far-right ideas. Byline Times have said they think there's now about 11 candidates who have been dropped by Reform since they started campaigning. One was Andrew Raw, who was its candidate for Darlington, who was accused of sharing extreme racism and hateful ideology. And then Sean Matthews, who was the Reform candidate for Horncastle, who said that Keir Starmer was owned by Muslims. If you vote for the man, you will get the Islamification of Great Britain. So, yes, to answer your question.
He should talk to the people that think Keir Starmer is owned by Zionists and just sort of thrash it out. Yeah. And they go, well, we can't both be right. Maybe we're both wrong. Our guest today is Tom Hamilton, who was once the head of research for Labour Party, helping prepare the likes of Ed Miliband for PMQs. He co-wrote the book Punch and Judy Politics with our former panellist, Ayesha Hazarika. Don't know what she's doing now. And he now runs the very good Substack Dividing Lines. Welcome, Tom.
Hello. Yes, Ayesha has been made a peer and I haven't. So if I'd been listed first on that book, it could all have been so different. Alphabetical order would have done it for me.
You're stuffed by your publisher there. You wrote 2 posts about the Tories' £2,000 tax lie. Clever people at the time were saying that at least it got people talking, like the 350 million on the Brexit bus. How has it panned out for them?
Well, I don't think it's panned out terribly for them. It could have gone a lot better, but people are talking about it. or at least they were until D-Day. That all sort of slightly sank it. They launched it and it didn't go anywhere. And then Rishi Sunak made it the main point of his TV debate performance last week. And the reason it landed so well there was that Keir Starmer didn't push back on it hard enough and fast enough in the debate. He did in the end, but it took a long time and the Tories were able to say that it was unanswered. The problem with it is that it is nonsense, and they overreached and they said, this is a figure that's been signed off by the Treasury. It is not a figure that's been signed off by the Treasury. It's got some figures within it that have been done by Treasury civil servants based on what Tory special advisors have told them that Labour policy is. And in many cases, that's not what Labour policy is at all. And so it's turned from a row about whether it's going to be £2,000 or not into a row about whether you can trust the Tories or not, which is much safer ground for Labour. But these figures always get bandied around.
Well, you explain on the post how it's actually like 4 layers of garbage, like that there is literally nothing at all sound about the figures. And also a point that I totally missed, that the messaging is contradictory, because if they're saying, oh, Labour don't have a plan, but then you're saying that Labour have a plan that is so precise that you can say that it's whatever it is, £2,097, isn't it? They don't even like round it to 2,000. Then that seems like they do have a plan. Yeah. And is this sort of we'll talk more about the Tory campaign, but is this a bit of a feature of messaging? Is that sometimes people they think, oh, this is a great little dig to get in today, and they don't think about how it fits with everything else?
I'm prone to be a bit boring about this, and you
come to the right place.
You introduced me as if I was some sort of campaign expert, and it's really important to say that I worked for the Labour Party in 3 general elections and we lost all 3 of them. So let's not overdo. You should hire this man. By the way, you should hire this man. But I'm always really pedantic about the fact that you have to make your messages line up with each other, and you can have different sorts of messages, but if they contradict each other, it becomes a real problem. And I do think, the Tory line is, we've got a plan and they haven't. The problems with that are, A, they haven't got a plan. B, Labour has got a plan, but you might not like it, and that's fine. There are arguments you can have about it. But C, as you say, part of their argument about Labour is, look at all these things in its plan and that you shouldn't like, and you can't make all these things hang together very well. And I think that's not why the Tories are not winning this election. There have a lot of other reasons, but it doesn't help.
In other exciting news, our election night live show at the Tabernacle in London is now sold out, and that's before we even got the chance to tell you that joining me, Ros, and Alex will be a special guest who's got a lot of history with this podcast, LBC legend James O'Brien. If you didn't get tickets, don't despair. We are streaming the whole thing live exclusively to Patreon backers. If you're a backer, you'll have details on how to register already. If not, there's never been a better time to join us as a supporter and a fun way to spend election night. Follow the link in the show notes. Let's begin. Rishi Sunak announced the Conservative Party's manifesto on Tuesday. What is in his box of delights? Ros, some of this, like good old National Service, had already been announced. Was there anything that leapt out as a surprise?
Well, the sheer length of it to start with. It's massive. It's huge. It's like pick and mix. There's just something for everyone in there. That surprised me somewhat. I didn't think they'd go there'd be quite so much
expected
detail.
Lean and mean.
Yes, I did expect lean, mean and bold, or whatever the adjective they're currently using about it is. But I suppose the thing that most surprised me was the housing offer. Which is to deliver 1.6 million well-designed homes in the right places while protecting our countryside. And they also want to abolish stamp duty for first-time buyers, most of them anyway, and another Help to Buy scheme, because that's really helped to bring down house prices and keep them low, hasn't it? And there's just not, there's tinkering around the edges, and there's the idea that abandoning nutrient neutrality, basically requirements around not polluting, will enable us to build more homes. But it's deeply, deeply unconvincing. And I was surprised that they were confident enough, let's say, to make that assertion. But, these housing targets are fucking meaningless. They just always are. They're nearly always missed.
Sunak at Silverstone, trying to make a little racing pun, which I would not stoop to. So the economy has turned the corner, but then growth figures were announced and they were stuck at 0%. I mean, this is not just a Tory problem. But is there just this chronic dishonesty about tax and spending all round? Like you either tax or you cut or you borrow, and nobody wants to sort of explain where they're doing, which one they're going to do.
Well, I think the fundamental problem is that when you explain, only a very few people are in a position to understand what you're explaining. It's the Institute for Fiscal Studies and policy wonks and that kind of person. So everyone else is going to rely on those institutions to tell them whether they're reliable or not. The turning the corner thing is unconvincing with growth flatlining, and also inflation looks likely to spike a bit in the autumn. Food prices are about to rise again because of the bad harvest that we're expecting due to so many fields being flooded in the UK in the spring. And because the wage growth has been quite strong, the interest rate cuts might be delayed again, which isn't going to help either. And the impact of the stricter migration controls, we don't really know yet what that will be, but it's bound to have some effect on the economy. So when you ask, is it dishonesty all round? Yeah, I mean, it's as I say, it's extremely difficult to get a grip as a non-economist and an ordinary person on these figures. But if you listen to what the IFS is saying, they are deeply sceptical about the ability of the Tories to deliver the 17 billion of tax cuts that they're promising, plus a big increase in defence spending.
I saw Geoffrey Cox on Politics Live earlier today, and he was defending the growth figures. And he was basically saying it's because we've had a particularly wet April. And you just have to think, isn't April well known for always being the wettest month of the year? If you're only defensive, it rained more in April than we expected. As to why the economy didn't grow in April, I think it's a pretty shoddy defence, and he was laughed off quite quickly.
Well, the economy's not a summer fate.
No.
I mean, you can't just blame everything on rain.
Especially in Britain, right? It doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
There's a bigger problem as well with the economy's turning a corner, we're turning the corner thing, because you've got to ask, hang on a minute, turning a corner from what? What's just happened and who was in charge then? One of Rishi Sunak's big problems, I think, has been that he is there to be the antidote to Liz Truss, but for internal political reasons, he can't say that. He can't come out and say, my predecessor was an absolute car crash and I'm in charge of getting things back on the road. He can't say it explicitly. So he sometimes says it implicitly. He talks about turning a corner, and the public go, well, hang on a minute. There was a time when you could blame Labour for this sort of thing. But that was 14 years ago, and it worked okay for the first 5. Then you could say things about Jeremy Corbyn, which was a different sort of set of issues. But we've got to a point now where the only people that you can blame, if you want to blame people, are either Liz Truss or Vladimir Putin. They lean into Vladimir Putin a bit, but, he's not responsible for the rain.
Maybe he is. Maybe he's manipulating the weather. So is there anything here for Labour to be worried about? They're very jumpy as a party. Is there any policy they're going to think, we've got to counter that?
I don't particularly think so. I think in part because of what Ros said, which is a lot of this had already been briefed out to the press. None of it was particularly new or exciting. I think for Labour, the biggest concerns will be those policies that are targeted at those kind of swing voters and those demographics which they might be wanting to bring on side. So, for example, pensioners. There was quite a lot of stuff for pensioners in there. Cut taxes for pensioners with new Triple Lock Plus. And there was also quite a bit for farmers as well, which is one of those groups that, typically has been Tory, and now Labour are very much kind of targeting that rural vote as well. So the Conservatives talked about backing farmers with a legal target, additional investment for food security, and protecting agricultural land as well. And then, of course, also those voters which, in the red wall, or those voters which might be kind of backing away from the Conservatives and looking at reform. So obviously the stuff on migration. But interestingly, we know the Tories didn't actually go as far as to say they're going to leave the ECHR. So I don't think there was anything particularly in there that Labour will have read and gone, oh God, we weren't expecting that. But I think it's just wondering if when those voters go to the ballot box and they're swing voters, if they might just think, do you know what, there was enough for me in there, I'm just going to stick with the Tories.
Well, I didn't have time to look into the details of this, but I noticed there's something about abolishing national insurance payments for the self-employed. As a new freelancer, will you be voting Conservative?
No. I mean, look, sounds great to have a little bit more money in my pocket, but I'd also like my public services to be run properly. I'd like more secure work. I'd like a better, more protected rental system so that if I don't get a lot of work one week, I'm not going to have to worry about my housing. So maybe for those who are kind of wealthier and more secure, that is slightly appealing. But I really think the national insurance tax cut is just such a strange thing to keep pushing. I mean, it hasn't worked. They've done it successfully.
Do it again, harder.
Yeah, it doesn't shift the polls. So no, it hasn't won my vote.
I love the fact that one of the policies you said that Labour might be worried about is that they've come out and given some more support to farmers. Yeah. And if the big worry for Labour is that the Tories might be able to hold onto the farmer vote, then I think it's probably in the bag.
It's
game
over,
point.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But it's interesting that, like you said, no promise to leave the ECHR or abolish inheritance tax. Were those the sort of things that you might have expected that didn't pop up?
Inheritance tax is an interesting one because although it's very much kind of a blue Tory-based policy and it's something that lots of MPs in the party do want, that contingency of red wall MPs actually were lobbying against it because they were just worried about how it would go down in their constituencies, which, I mean, I don't know the polling on this, but there is another argument to say that it's seen as quite an aspirational policy. A lot of people don't really understand whether it would affect them or not. And even voters who might not be impacted by it still are in favour of it. But when it was originally being discussed, I think around the spring budget and possibly the autumn statement as well, there was definitely pushback from Red Wall MPs who said, I don't want to have to explain this to my constituents when they are struggling to heat.
The risk is that you get Labour leaflets coming out to a lot of these places that say, and they will say, literally nobody or potentially 4 or 5 people in this entire constituency are liable to this tax. And this is what the Tories' priority is. Therefore, don't vote for them.
Well, anything that just seems like rich person sort of thing, like if you just go, we're doing a helicopter tax or a private jet tax or a caviar tax, like people are all for it. Tom, what surprised me a little bit maybe was that considering that they're unlikely to win, that they could have just gone full wish list, and they haven't. They've obviously held back on certain things. So even though a Tory future is extremely unlikely, they are trying to tell a story about what one might be like. What is the narrative here?
I think the narrative is supposed to be, we have managed the economy well. I know. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Yeah, look, it is not. It's not my. It used to be my job actually to pretend to be David Cameron in PMQ's rehearsals. So I sort of I spent some time sort of channeling Tories, and I don't do that anymore. But I think they want to say that they've managed the economy competently to the extent that they're now able to give you back some money through tax cuts. That's the fundamental narrative. The big problem with it, apart from the fact that those promises are not particularly credible anyway, is that I think people have got to a point, and we saw the same in 1997 as well. I think you've got to be really careful about the 1997 comparisons. But one of the things in the 90s was that although in some ways by the mid-90s the economy was doing okay, public services were really, really run down and people could see it. And I think people now are really conscious of the fact that, you can't get a GP appointment. You've got to wait. One of my colleagues waited 11 hours in A&E not very long ago. Waiting lists are incredibly long. You've got schools full of some sort of fibre whose name I forget that's going to rack. That's it. It's going to fall on kids' heads. All of these things, and it's all very well saying, "Well, we'll give you a tax cut," but a lot of people who are the target of that tax cut, we'd all like a bit more money, but we also, it's not the only thing we want.
Starmer called this a Jeremy Corbyn-style uncosted manifesto. Now, Labour's 2019 manifesto may have been implausibly overstuffed, but it was in fact costed by John McDonnell, and he made a big deal of this fact. Is this sort of wise or fair attack? I don't know. I can't think of an equivalent. I don't think Sunak goes like, "Oh, well, this is like a Liz Truss style pile of shit." It seems weird.
So, for one thing, I genuinely think he should say that. I think that would do him a lot of good to distance himself much more explicitly than he has. But the thing about the Jeremy Corbyn 2019 manifesto in particular, I mean, you can argue about, it had a balance sheet in it. That's not the same as saying that the sums definitely added up. And the same with the Tory manifesto has a balance sheet in it, and that's not, that doesn't make it instantly credible by definition. I don't want to get into relitigating the 2019 manifesto, except to say, and this is the only important point about it, is that it lost really badly. And so to say to the electorate, that is like a manifesto that you rejected, we're going to have a manifesto that's more like one that you're not going to reject, is fine. I totally get that, really leaning into the anti-Jeremy Corbyn stuff then leads to people going, well, hang on a minute, you campaign for him, and he did, in as much as he was a Labour MP at the time. But I think he's done enough in the last 5 years, and you can love it or hate it, to show that he's not of that tribe within the Labour Party to be able to get away with it.
Well, one of the funny things also is that the Corbyn team at that time was so worried about him being a potential leadership challenger that they kind of sidelined him during 2019. So this whole thing, you campaigned for him, it's like, yeah, not much. You really didn't. Ros, Sunak's interview with ITV's Paul Rand, which must be the most heavily trailed political interview in history, was well worth coming home early from the D-Day commemorations for, because he got to share the moving tale of how his parents' decision to send him to Winchester School meant that they could not afford Sky TV. I mean, this was his chance to seem like relatable. Is this just one of those things where you're like, it's not that he has made a mistake or he's misspoken, but like he is actually physically incapable?
Well, there's no point in him trying to seem relatable. He's not relatable. There's nothing much that's relatable about Rishi Sunak. You know, he had an expensive private education. He went to Oxford. He's now unfeasibly rich, partly because, but not solely because, he married a very rich woman. So there is not much to empathise with, and that is fundamentally the problem. Not, you could tell that he was scratching around when he was asked the question. He's saying, well, what? Oh, Sky TV, yeah. And the idea that, his parents made sacrifice. Of course, people do make sacrifices to get their kids into private school, but they generally involve things like having fewer holidays, which doesn't tend to cut through much with the electorate. An interesting question is why was Boris Johnson never asked these kind of questions? Why was he never asked, what sacrifices did your family have to make? Because everyone knew enough about Boris Johnson to know where he came from and what he represented, and they were somehow okay with that. And that's really the lesson for Sunak, that he just needs to lean into this and be honest and say, I had huge advantages. I now want to, pay society back by serving my country as Prime Minister for a bit longer. And he doesn't. And I don't really understand why he doesn't do that.
The sacrifice thing really annoys me, because I was trying to think, what would I say if I was being asked, what have you sacrificed? And the thing is, for me, a sacrifice is something that's really quite considerable. Like you don't have enough food. You have to get by with like a malfunctioning car or like a really kind of knackered mobile phone because you literally can't afford to replace it. Choosing not to go on holiday or to go on holiday in England, or choosing not to buy this, TV package or a nice jacket, that's not a sacrifice.
No.
You're not giving anything up. You're just choosing not to buy a thing that you kind of feel that you're well on enough to buy.
Conversely, when you're really poor, you don't have the chance to make sacrifices because you have got an option. All you can do is spend your money on the essentials.
He didn't just say that he went without Sky TV. He said famously he went without Sky TV, which, I mean, it's not famous because I don't think we'd ever heard this before. It wasn't something that I think has been reported. But it was famous in his life. So maybe it's something he was teased about at school. Maybe it sort of rankled with him that he was the only kid at Winchester who didn't have Sky.
No, I don't know. I didn't see the match last night and they boo, Skyless wanker or whatever.
Yeah, he's the kid who hadn't seen The Simpsons.
But he was at boarding school, so he wasn't going home every night and watching Sky anyway. It's a mystery to me.
You watched his BBC interview with Nick Robinson. Briefly, how did he fare there?
He was very tense. He was given a chair, which kind of one of those which invites you to lean back, and he didn't. And he sat ramrod straight in it. The main frustration, I think, for viewers was that he kept repeating the same answers when Nick Robinson challenged him. There was an element of the AI where it was very slightly rephrased, but it was the same thing. And Robinson went in quite hard on the £2,000 claim, but as we just talked about, that kind of thing is very hard to do in an interview because the accounting is just too creative for the normies to understand. And you can say, as Robinson did, ex-public official disagrees with this analysis. And Rishi Sunak will just say, it's solid and no one is any the wiser. And as long as you can keep the discussion on the figures, which unfortunately not completely, but Robinson did lean into, the accountant is always going to do okay. He's always going to have the advantage. I think it might have been more interesting and productive had he gone more down the route of state of public services and questioned him more on what was, how bad things were and what could be done about it.
Zoe, there was talk of a rival rebel manifesto from the right of the Tories, but people like Suella Braverman and the freshly radicalised Robert Jenrick are said to be keeping their powder dry until they've seen how the manifesto has landed. Are we going to see this?
I don't think so.
Really?
Because
Okay.
no, I mean, I wasn't even aware there was talk of a rebel manifesto.
Oh, yes.
In this case, but knowing those two and their clan and how they like to whip up a frenzy and then march back down the hill again, I suspect they won't do anything. Suella Braverman's been doing a bit of unhelpful briefing to the press. She suggested that the Conservative Party should embrace Nigel Farage, but that's about it. I mean, there's a couple of things here. The first is that, like we've said a number of times, all of these policies have pretty much been briefed out before. So if they were reasonably happy with them now, they're going to continue to be. The other is that to produce a rival manifesto, you need to have the resources to properly cost it and to show that it's better than whatever it is the Conservative Party machinery can produce. And we saw the New Conservatives do a similar thing not too long ago, where they produced a sort of immigration manifesto, and their sums quite quickly didn't add up and got torn apart the very same day. So I don't think they will. I think, if anything, they'll probably just continue to snipe from the sidelines. I reckon everybody's waiting to attack after the election, when there's a massive defeat. That's when people start lining up their leadership bids and start publicly talking about the new direction of the Conservative Party.
We should mention the Lib Dem manifesto too, which has got quite a lot of stuff in it. What stands out for you?
I thought there was quite a lot of interesting stuff in there. So obviously the big thing that captured the headlines was rejoining the single market, this kind of push towards aligning with the EU again.
No.
Yeah, which, is not, it's expected to some degree from the Lib Dems, but I think that kind of enthusiasm was quite, was welcomed by quite a lot of people.
I thought Rejoin had been killed by Joe Swinson, so I was quite pleased by that.
Obviously, there's a big focus on carers as well. So they talked about reforming the carers allowance, and they talked about introducing free personal care based on the model introduced by the Liberal Democrats in Scotland in 2002. And then there was also other things like giving 16-year-olds the vote and bringing in PR, which, famously they tried to do before and it all went wrong. And just generally more GPs, increasing public spending, a lot of those kind of vote winners with, the sort of left progressive big spend voters.
It's that version of the Lib Dems, isn't it? It was like scrap the Rwanda scheme, scrap the 2-child limit, something progressive on gender recognition, rejoin or whatever. I mean, reading quite a lot about Roy Jenkins recently for work, and this is very Jenkins-side. It's PR, it's Europe, it's social liberalism. I like those Lib Dems. Tom, YouGov polled people about which policies they like. Right at the top are the Lib Dem pledges like cleaner rivers and free school meals for primary schools. Labour's big winner so far is a publicly owned renewable energy company, while the Tories' top pick is the triple lock plus for pensioners. Down the bottom are national service and, sorry, Ed, reducing the voting age to 16. Voters are famously inconsistent and paradoxical and confused, though. Sorry, voters. And you did a poll where basically people were sort of challenged to identify which policy was whose, and people got a lot wrong. What does it tell you? What did that tell you?
I mean, it tells us, I think, quite a lot about how the public consume politics and how they think about politics, and how the people who cover politics professionally or work in it are just not perceiving it in the same way. So the poll that we did at Public First, who I work for, so I'm just going to get the plug in now, we asked about 12 policies and said, whose is this policy? We didn't even ask if they supported them. We just asked whose it was. And people did recognise some Tory policies as Tory policies. So national service, they know it's a Tory policy. The Rwanda scheme, they know is a Tory policy. Any NHS policy, they think is a Labour policy, whatever it is.
Okay.
So Lib Dem voters are more likely to think that the Lib Dem health policy is a Labour policy than Lib Dem policy. And interestingly, the Green policy of a wealth tax on assets over £10 million, 50% of people thought that was a Labour policy, which it very much isn't. I mean, maybe that's an interesting policy area that could be up for grabs in the next Parliament, but it absolutely isn't their policy now. Only 10% thought it was a Green policy. More people thought it was a Tory policy, actually, which it also very much isn't. So, yeah, people are interestingly unclear on what people are standing for, which is why I think you can overstate how much elections are about policy. Government is about policy. And whether you can deliver well what you want and whether people like what you deliver. But elections are much more about messaging, people's understanding of how the last few years have gone, whether they're happy or unhappy, whether they perceive that change is needed, and if so, who's going to deliver it. One of the interesting things about the Lib Dems, by the way, in terms of clearly they have some policy that will appeal to people who might be attracted to Labour in other ways, or who might be slightly to the left of Labour, or who might wish that Labour were doing a bit more on Europe or on PR or on some other things. The Lib Dems and Labour are just not competing against each other at all in this election for geographical, psephological reasons, not because they love or hate each other. All the Lib Dem target seats are not Labour target seats, as it happens. That won't be true in other elections in future. It hasn't been true in the past. But all of Labour's targets are held by the Tories and the SNP, and all of the Lib Dems targets are held by the Tories and the SNP. So there are just no direct Lib Dem Labour fights, so they're not attacking each other at all.
That's why it surprised me, perhaps, that it wasn't a little more sort of soft Tory, that it was so progressive, considering who they're running against. I just want to finish off what you were saying about policy often doesn't matter that much. Theresa May's so-called dementia tax really damaged her 2017 campaign. Is that unusual for one policy to make such a big difference? It's maybe the one thing that I most remember.
Yeah, I think it is really unusual, and it goes wrong when it goes wrong. One of the really interesting things about that 2017 manifesto, if you remember that election, that was the Tories going, we've got a tiny majority now, but we're 20 points ahead in the polls. We've got Jeremy Corbyn against us. Everybody hates him. We're going to give him an absolute electoral kicking whenever we choose to go. Why don't we just do it now and get a massive majority, and then we can just get on with Brexit and everything else we want to get on with. By the way, there are a whole load of intractable problems that no government has managed to sort out over the last decade, 2 decades. This is our chance to put the difficult stuff in the manifesto, get a mandate for it, and then reform lots of things in the next parliament. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of the reforms they wanted to make, but I don't disagree with the basic prescription that there were some big areas, social care, needed to be dealt with. It hadn't been, and it still hasn't been. The problem was that they missed the middle bit, which was winning, and persuading enough people, not just to just about put the Tories in, but to put them in with that big majority. And I was. It wasn't me directly doing it, but I saw those mail outs going out to people. It was an absolute gift to Labour, saying, if the Tories get in, this is what's going to happen to your pension, this is what's going to happen to your house, this is what's going to happen that they hadn't previously promised. They just gifted Labour a whole set of attack lines in that election because they wanted to do something hard. And so when you see parties not doing things that are hard in general election campaigns, it can be a bit annoying, but it's because they've got to win before they can do anything.
Now it's time for questions from our Patreon backers in But Your Emails. If you support us on Patreon, you can submit a question too, because it's election time. We are doing 2. Roz, let's start with you. Jessica Poynton. One of the things I haven't heard around immigration from many of the parties is not how they're going to get the numbers down or how many visas they're going to give to secure a trade deal, but how they're going to educate the electorate on why immigration is a good thing. That foreigners of all stripes tend to improve a country because they've elected to live there. They have fewer criminal convictions and contribute more per capita than native citizens. Does the panel think this would ever be a point made by any party leaders? Now, in the 7-way debate, that point was made, I think, by the Greens, SNP, and Plaid, maybe. And I got fucking tingles because I was like, oh my God, there's people saying that immigration is actually good. So by the party leaders, presumably, this means Labour and Tories more.
Yeah. I mean, in Scotland, there's relatively little immigration to Scotland, which is one of the reasons why the SNP is quite an easy position to take. I think that case is easier to make when people feel that immigration is controlled. And for me, that is, for better or worse, the key to being able to make that positive case for immigration, that you have to convince people that you are in control of the people who are coming in. whether that's irregular migration, whether it's small boats or whether it's legal migration. People want some degree of controls on both, because otherwise they will leap to the conclusion, which is not always incorrect, that it will create pressures on housing and public services and reveal a problem, let's say, with low wages in the sectors where migrants work. And we see that, in the care sector, and that's why it's good news that Labour is apparently promising a higher minimum wage for care workers, because that's a good way of, dignifying the sector for both migrants and non-migrants who are working there. So I don't think that point will be made until the person in charge is able to say, we have got immigration at this level, that is about the right level for this country, and we have done that. So that's my answer, which I suspect Jessica may not like very much.
Tom, you did a whole post about Labour's infamous hate crockery, the controls on immigration mug, which was, and all the ways in which it was sort of like misunderstood, and there was actually a mug for each pledge.
Yeah, it wasn't. I wasn't trying to defend it so much.
No, but just the way that in isolation it looks like they've just made one mug and it hates immigrants.
Yeah.
But that idea of like controls on immigration is sort of, in itself, it sort of sounds ominous. But of course, that is sort of, that wasn't actually that harsh a policy. It wasn't
So the policy wasn't harsh, and that was, and I've got to be careful how I say this, that was part of the problem, because it was designed to sound harsh, but when you dug into it, actually the controls on immigration that Labour were proposing in that election, apart from having a few more border security personnel, which probably quite a good case for that. We're going to have controls on immigration for as long as we have borders at all. So you might as well staff them, because otherwise we have really long queues.
Well, what's the one we're having now? Like the ITV drama that they're promising, Border Force, Border Squad, Border Patrol. What's the one that Labour's promising?
It could well be. It's a border security command, isn't it? That they're planning.
Starring James Nesbitt.
To go back to the earlier poll, 42% of Reform voters think that's a Reform policy, but it's not.
Right.
So Labour was proposing controls on immigration that were actually to do with minimum wage enforcement, actually, mostly. It's about not having foreign workers coming over and being exploited. Perfectly nice policy, but not what anyone thinks of as controls on immigration if they want them. So you had something that sounded racist to the people who didn't want Labour to be racist, and sounded like it wasn't actually doing anything, not a piece of collateral that anyone would buy except as a piece of satire. So it didn't work. But the overall, we want to do something about immigration, that's not in itself a problem. It was all the ways in which it came out.
Zoe, here's one for you from Shelley Harris. As I'm hearing lots of understandable speculation about the ways in which Reform's resurgence could hit the Tories, but not much about their possible effect on Labour. I'm canvassing for Labour and was surprised this weekend to meet voters who talked about choosing between Labour and Reform. Might we be underestimating Reform's impact there? And I wonder if that is in maybe particular sort of parts of the country.
So I was in Warrington yesterday, and I joined Labour on some canvassing as a journalist. Although I did put one flyer through the door just to be helpful.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, full disclosure. And that is something that was coming up a bit there, right? So people were, everywhere we went, even houses which had previously voted Tory in the past were all pretty much saying, I can't vote Tory this time. I'm not sure where I'm going to vote, though. They didn't have a lot of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. Immigration came up as an issue a lot. I would say the top issues were immigration and the NHS, from doorsteps and talking to voters in the street. What I think is going on there is not that Reform is appealing to Labour voters. It's that Reform is appealing to those who don't want to vote Conservative anymore. And people who don't want to vote Conservative anymore are choosing where to put their protest vote.
And these might be former Labour voters who switched in 2019.
Yeah. Absolutely. And a lot of them are swing voters. So I spoke to one man who has voted Labour. He voted for Margaret Thatcher. He voted for Labour again. He voted for Boris Johnson. He's flicked around a lot. And now he's saying immigration is his number one priority. But he's not convinced by Labour. He's definitely not voting Conservative, but he doesn't like Nigel Farage. So really, a voter who doesn't know where to place his vote at all, I suspect from the way he was talking, and he was saying he would pay a lot of attention to the manifestos, he was leaning more towards Labour. But clearly, there are voters out there who are basically weighing up between Reform and Labour. Now, the reason that Reform isn't going to have an impact on that sort of core Labour vote, or those voters who have switched from Conservative to Labour, so say 5 years' time at the next election, will those Labour voters vote Reform? Probably not, is because lots and lots of Labour voters don't look like Reform voters. They are a slightly different demographic, and overwhelmingly, most Labour voters still like the EU. So they won't be taken in by Reform. So it isn't that Labour voters are leaning towards Reform. It's that we have a lot of homeless Conservative voters who can't figure out where to put their protest vote.
I heard on John Harris's Guardian podcast, where he goes out and talks to people in the street, somebody in, I think, Jeremy Hunt's constituency, who was one of those Tories that's sick of the Tories. And he was like, I'm wavering between Lib Dem and Reform. And it was like, they're really different, man. Next up, campaign season is in full swing, and Ed Davey is taking that very literally. No water slide or roller coaster in the land is safe from the fun-loving Lib Dem leader. How's that working out for him? And 3 weeks into the campaign, what do we make of the different parties' performances so far? We have with us Tom Hamilton, who sorts the wheat from the Sunak on his Dividing Lines Substack. Tom, we've discussed the manifesto. One reason, perhaps, why it's got more attention is because of Ed Davey's big days out. I can't recall a campaign approach like that. Do you approve?
Yeah, I think it's fun. I think it's like the fundamental job of the leader of the Lib Dems is to make people know that he exists, because they're the third party. Well, the third party in England, the fourth party in the UK on the previous elections numbers. So they don't get a huge amount of news coverage. They've just got to get seen. And if that means you have to pretend to accidentally fall off a paddleboard when actually you're deliberately falling off a paddleboard, because that will it'll get you in the news, but it'll get you on Have a Good News for You as well. It'll get you on everything. It'll get you all over Twitter. And people will go, okay, I don't know if they go, I like the way he falls off a paddleboard, I'll give him my vote. It's not quite as simple as that. But it just adds to the attention. So yeah, it is silly photo ops. It's paddleboards, it's roller coasters, it's I can't even remember what else, but all sorts of fun stuff.
Isn't it weird just that fallibility? Because back in the 80s when Neil Kinnock fell over on a beach during conference because it was very windy, very stormy.
Oh, that was accidental, though.
And that's what I mean. It was accidental, and it was shown over and over again. Like, look at this idiot; he can't even stand up.
But his job was to be prime ministerial, not just to be noticed. Ed Davey's not going to be prime minister at the end of this, and he knows that. We all know that. It's fine. He could conceivably be leader of opposition if the polls go the way that they are. Although I don't think that was necessarily the plan at the start. And if he is, then he won't spend the 2029 election campaign falling off paddleboards. He'll spend it in suits looking serious.
So received wisdom is that polls narrow during a campaign. They haven't. If anything, the gap has widened. And the Tories went into this with, I believe, a 1% chance of winning. What is their strategy as you see it? We talked about the manifesto. Like, are you aware of a strategy? I
mean, look, the strategy has always been Rishi Sunak is a serious guy, and he's competent, and it's all and he's got good big ideas, and he's moving the party on, and he's going to cut your taxes, and he's managing the economy effectively. The problem is that's not what people think is going on. So that's why they started the campaign. I mean, apart from getting caught in the rain at the beginning, they went early on for these big pledges. They got a lot of attention, as I said before. People know what they are and they associate with the Tory party, but which are designed to win back people who are moving away mostly to the right rather than to the left. So dealing with that reform flank. So when Nigel Farage came in and said, actually, I'm going to stand. When Nigel Farage came in and said, actually, I'm going to stand in this election after all, and then Sunak didn't go to the whole of the D-Day commemorations, what Sunak was trying to do is to basically shore it to his right and probably not win the election, actually. I think the whole Tory campaign from before the campaign started was predicated on the idea that things were going to swing back and narrow. It's never happened, but they've got to at least, they've moved now to talking about total wipeout. And, how do they avoid that?
Have they really adjusted to that? Because, I mean, they're ostensibly sticking to this 80-20 strategy from many moons ago. Defend 80 seats, win 20. That's not going to happen. But now they sort of seem to have gone to the don't give Labour a blank check, which sort of reads as please save us from extinction. Have they fully gone in on that, or is that just maybe some people?
I don't think they meant to. I think it's a big mistake that they've made. So if you look at the reporting of it, there's a Tory ad that's gone up on Facebook that shows a graphic of the Tories coming third to the Lib Dems, and it's quite funny that that's happened. But it's just a little snippet. It's a still within the ad. I think it's bad sign-off protocols. They did not want that to be the main story coming out of for this day of the campaign, but because it's really newsworthy, people have picked up on it. So I think whether someone's head is rolling in CCHQ, I don't know, but that is what's then led to the question. The question is, are you going to get wiped out? And then you have Grant Shapps, other cabinet ministers having to come out and say, well, actually, no, we're not going to be totally wiped out. We don't want Labour to get a massive landslide. You're getting into interesting sort of, first year undergraduate seminar sort of political questions about whether it's good to have a big majority or not, and what checks and balances look like. All of which is predicated on the idea that the Tories are going to have about 10 seats, which is not the conversation that they need to be having in a campaign that they could, in theory, still win because they're standing everywhere.
So, Zoe, Labour could win by a landslide of historic dimensions, which makes for a weird campaign. Like I said, on the Tory side, does it also create turnout problems and potential losses on the left? Because I noticed that the Greens, some of their messaging is running the idea that, I think there's a piece of slice of toast in one of them. The Tories are toast, therefore you can vote Green without any fear of letting the Tories back in. And I wonder if that sort of accelerates that leakage to the left, because people think, well, no risk.
Yeah, I think that is a worry now for Labour. I mean, I think, they're still pretty confident that they are going to form a majority, but I think there's worries that if that message really permeates that it's a done deal, Labour are going to win, they're going to win with a massive majority. And if that narrative drip feeds through that the majority could be so big that nobody will stop Keir Starmer from enacting his, huge epic
cautious
plan.
Pragmatism.
Yeah.
Oh no, who will stop this sensible managerial?
Then you can imagine campaigns in sort of progressive areas and amongst certain demographics where they say, actually, we really need that, in this seat, we could perceivably get a Lib Dem or a Green or someone like that, and we really need those voices in Parliament. So I think that is a worry. I also think turnout is a concern, because when people feel like their vote just doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how they vote, it's just not going to be heard, people just go, well, there's no point me voting then. And they just, even if they were going to cast their vote for Labour, loads of people go, it's a done deal, I don't need to go out, it's fine. And, particularly for Labour, because that's often is younger people and people who, don't typically vote as much. They're more affected by that. So yeah, I think it's a concern. I don't think it's enough of a concern that, it looks like it could really damage their chances of victory. But I think it is more of a worry than it was probably at the start of the campaign.
And Labour is being so careful that they even managed to make Angela Rayner boring during the debate. It was really weird. It was like she'd been slightly anaesthetised. I was like, that's not Angela Rayner. Apart from the Diane Abbott dust-up, which we discussed only last week, I think, it seems like years ago. Do you think they've dropped the ball at all? Is there anything that they would be thinking, yikes?
I think the main thing was the £2,000 line, not coming back quickly enough on that in the debate. I think that just was an example of Starmer just not being quick enough and needing to be on the ball with responding to those kind of attacks. Maybe a little bit of complacency, maybe thinking it would be quite good. Rishi Sunak would unravel during the debate because he's typically not very good in front of the camera. But I think generally, actually, they've managed to keep their campaign together really quite well. The Diane Abbott dust-up was, it did detract from a week where Labour should have been talking about the NHS. But actually, again, I think what they have done quite successfully is sat back and let the Conservatives self-destruct. So Keir Starmer hasn't really been wading into all of these gaffes that Rishi Sunak has done. He's just been saying, well, I was there the whole day, at the D-Day commemorations, and look at all the great social media videos I took while I was there. He's just kind of letting them destroy themselves.
And this episode is out on Thursday for patrons, Friday for everyone else. So most listeners will be aware of the Labour manifesto, which of course we're not able to discuss yet. Ros, we must not forget, because people will write in, the Greens, the SNP, and Plaid Cymru. I think the seven-way debate was very good in that way, because it really did say, look, this is not just about, the top ones. Are any of them impressing you, either in that debate or in the policies they're announcing, or just in the way that they're going about their campaign?
Yeah, the Plaid Cymru leader has been quite impressive, and he didn't cut through in terms of. I think I'm the only person who thinks this, but when you look at the viewer surveys, he made almost no impression at all. But I thought, considering that his target audience, that's probably not particularly surprising. And I think Plaid Cymru may well be in a position to capitalise on Vaughan Gething's problems in Wales. He had a vote of no confidence last week. He has not resigned, but his position looks very weak, let's say, and that may not be getting much attention in Westminster or in the rest of the country, but in Wales it really matters. Yeah, they've got a Welsh leader who looks like a lame duck. I think Carla Denyer has been benefiting a lot from the extra publicity. She looks she looks credible. Her background as an engineer in renewables is perfect for the Green Party and their potential voters, and she benefits, of course, from being open about the kind of state that she wants and the kind of things that she's happy to do, and the way that she's quite relaxed about raising taxes in order to achieve them. And this will, I think, may be one of the most salient points of the campaign in the end, that if Labour does lose voters as the campaign goes on to the Lib Dems and to the Greens, normally previously in an election campaign, you would expect that to be a message that said, well, Labour needs to, not be quite so left wing. Labour needs to do more on the environment, and there may well be an element of that. But because the Lib Dem and Green offerings are so much more, quite frankly, socialist than the Labour ones, and explicitly so about their willingness to raise taxes, the message that Labour may have to take from that is going to be quite different.
I'm sort of leaning almost towards wanting the sort of Greens to do well in a way that therefore pushes Labour a little bit to the left in office, and particularly to do more on climate and whatever. It would be good to get that kind of pressure. I'm not telling anybody how to vote, but I'm persuaded by your argument. What about the SNP now that independence is maybe not the thing to run on this time? Like, what are they? Nicola Sturgeon is maybe not the thing to run on. What is the thing to run on?
I think the thing to run on is still the hope of independence, because
is that still the main plank?
Well, that is the only thing. Basically, if you're Scottish, you may well feel that it's time to get rid of this crowd in this right wing crowd in Westminster, and the question is whether you want to vote Labour in order to make that more likely, or whether you vote SNP, which may make that slightly less likely, but the difference, I think the key difference there will be whether you support independence or not, whether you want to rejoin the EU as well, because that's a key difference with Labour. SNP want to rejoin. And that will be very salient as time goes on. If you're really attached to the idea of an independent Scotland, if you're really keen, particularly, there was a very telling moment a few days ago when the SNP said that they would be happy to have new oil gas fields in the North Sea. That's not Labour policy. Labour doesn't want to open any new ones. It will exploit ones that are already there, but it doesn't want new ones. And there we're getting back to the idea of energy independence, which you saw the SNP leader refer to very fleetingly but quite angrily during the debate. And that can cut through quite hard with their supporters.
Tom, obviously you've been focusing on the sort of big two parties. Is there anything from a kind of I know you're not a campaign expert, but I'm going to keep calling you one. From those other parties that strikes you as impressive? I'm
not sure that I've seen anything that's particularly impressive from them, although some of them may be perfectly competent. And the Greens are executing a strategy which is focused on really 2 or 3 seats maximum, which is, it may well be successful there. I was quite interested in the way that the SNP are using the polls, which overall are showing a massive Labour lead across the country. They're also showing, as it happens, probably neck and neck occasional Labour leads in Scotland. So as it stands, the SNP stand to lose seats to Labour. They've started making the argument that Labour can be the Westminster government with a comfortable majority on current polling, even if it doesn't pick up a single SNP seat in Scotland. So Scottish voters should just let that happen. And it just strikes me as a kind of a slight abrogation of responsibility of saying, you should want to have a Westminster Labour government, but you shouldn't vote for it. It's just a very difficult message to land, I think.
And what's happening with the meme wars? Because I've noticed that it's not like in the olden days. I know posters could come out quite quickly, but you still just sort of had to, print the buggers up. Now it just seems like there's a lot of kind of itchy-fingered memes just like firing out of the Twitter accounts. Is that good for a campaign? These very sort of just spontaneous, like one day only, like snark a lot of the time.
I think they need to be able to show all the main parties need to be able to show that they are doing stuff. And if you notice that you haven't noticed anything from any party for a while, I think it becomes a bit of a problem. There's also really obviously both a quality control issue and a sort of a strategic consistency issue. You need to make sure that you are putting the right messages out. One of the interesting things around Twitter is almost anything that the Tories put out, and this isn't even necessarily to criticise the output, although I would criticise a lot of the output, almost everything that they gets a huge amount of mocking quote tweets, a huge amount of hostile replies. So it gets shared quite widely, actually, but not always in a positive way. But that message does get out, but some of it is a bit rubbish. They put out a thing the other day, which was a poster. It was a photo of a poster under a railway bridge of Angela Rayner controlling a Keir Starmer glove puppet, and I was thinking that's not. I might be wrong about this, but I don't think that's a real poster. I think they've somehow decided to mock it up as a photo rather than actually put it anywhere in real life.
She's pulling his strings. And I thought, 1, glove puppets don't have strings. 2, is that scary? Yeah. It's not like Jeremy Corbyn or like Len McCluskey or somebody. It's like it's Angela Rayner.
People quite like Angela Rayner. She's overwhelmingly the most popular Labour politician that comes across it.
It's like, oh no, don't vote for him. The most popular politician in Britain is behind.
Yeah.
The other thing about that graphic, and I shouldn't encourage people to go and seek it out, but I can't prove it without making you go and seek it out, is that if you zoom in on it, Keir Starmer has the hands of a really, really old man in that photo. I don't know why. It's not Keir Starmer. It's some dummy that they put Keir Starmer's head on, but they've used a model with really, really old man's hands. So there we are.
I've been spending quite a lot of time on Labour TikTok recently for various reasons, and it's been interesting because there's a lot of snark, and as you say, and clipping up examples of Rishi Sunak being idiotic and elitist. But there's also a decided attempt to make the Labour Party quite sexy. And you saw this most recently with where they clipped out a bit of the leaders and deputy leaders debate and put Northern Queen on it. And then there was one which was a bit cringy last week or the week before with Keir Starmer, and it was a piss take of a song that I believe is popular among the young people called "I'm Looking for a Man in Finance," and and this one was "I'm looking for a new Prime Minister, good vibes." So those attempts I think are perhaps the most telling. They carried it off just about, but it was something quite new in the arsenal of political advertising that I hadn't seen before.
I'm not sure I want sexy Labour. To finish off, remaining online, Roz, Reform UK is dominating Facebook shares, as you'd expect, because it's popular among older people. But it is narrowly ahead of Labour on TikTok. I don't understand that one. So is Farage's insurgent pitch working? Because he was very much, wasn't he, like, join the insurgency on that debate. Like, is that coming across? Do they think, I know, like young people on TikTok going, who's this exciting fellow?
I don't get this reform ahead on TikTok thing. TikTok metrics are extremely hard to measure, not least because they don't accept paid advertising. So they don't have any reason to give you the figure or expose the figures that people are actually looking at. And also it's very, the stuff they've done is not that impressive. The latest reform TikTok is actually reform boasting about how many negative comments there are, bigging up reform on other parties' TikTok accounts. It's terribly meta. It's terribly up its own backside. And to be quite frank, the voters that reform is after are not well, they might be after young people. They're not really going to get it's not a TikTok election as far as reform is concerned. And I'm pretty convinced that the huge numbers of spam comments that you see on other parties' TikTok saying vote reform are almost certainly sock puppets and being paid for.
Don't they have like any fun clips set to Billie Eilish where someone explains why Lord Halifax should have made a deal with Hitler in 1940?
No, they have.
That's what the kids want.
They have Nigel
Bad guy, it
Farage
could be
standing
called.
in the rain under an umbrella in one. You know, it's not killer content.
Check them out, kids. We've reached the end of the show. So thank you very much to Zoe.
Thank you.
Roz.
Thank you.
And our special guest, Tom Hamilton.
Thank you.
Stick around for the extra bit after Demon is a Monster by Corner Shop, and a hearty salute to our generous supporters, without whom we could not keep making these podcasts at this crucial time for our nation. Why not join them for as little as £3 a month to get the podcast early and without ads, plus lots more? Search Oh God What Now Patreon to find out how. We'll see you next time.
Hello from me, and thank you for enabling us to subscribe to Sky TV at last. To Andrew Mather, Ev-Tim Ivanov, Jill, Sean O'Fitzkelly and Luke Fraser.
Big shout from me, and thanks for helping us afford our £2,000 labour tax bombshell to Eamon McCarran, Venetia Strangways Booth, Misha Hall, David Warburton Burley and Danielle Robinson.
Finally, hello from me. Thank you for donating just enough for us to be able to join Ed Davey on the waltzers, to Dave Oliver, Sheila Blakeman-Sheed, Layla and Dragon Sex Master from the Cumbria Sex Masters, I believe. And hello to a returning backer all the way from Rock's back pages, it's Mark Pringle.